Okay, I'm getting ready to drill for the handle pins. And it's the same procedure I have shown a lot of times. I've got it in my jig to hold everything up in line, basically perpendicular to the drill bit. And I've got the first scale clamped down there, and I've got a leather pad between my clamp jaw and the surface of the antler. I don't want to chip anything. I've upped the speed of my drill press just a little bit, so this doesn't want to splinter out as I pass through it. I'm still going to go through slowly. I know I've got my hand right in your way. There we are. I'm going to stop short of mounting a GoPro to my head like Pat does in his videos. For one, I don't want to buy one, and two, I'm not sure I would like to wear one of those. It's a little fiddly doing it like this with an irregular surface. Okay, so there's 6 holes. Now, just like I do with everything else, I'm going to go put some locator pins in here so they don't move, and so I can take my clamp off, put the other scale on, flip all of this over, and drill back through the other side. Down to the last 2 holes, and what I have done is I have just jumped locator pins from hole to hole as I drilled them, and I'm down to the last 2. But as I was saying, there is a distinct smell when you're working with this antler or bone, because they're really about the same thing as opposed to horn. I've made knives with desert sheep horn and cow's horn handles. Some of that stuff gets pretty heavy walled, and a horn is made of hair, and an antler is a bone growth. There's a difference. But you really know when you're working with a piece of horn. If you ever singed a bunch of hair and smelled that, then you know what I'm talking about. It purely stinks. This doesn't stink, it just has its own distinct odor. Okay, so there are 3 pins, and the scales are drilled. I had the other 3 pins cut over there and just waiting. Now, one difference that I do when I do a stag handle like this, the first thing I'm going to do is take a sharp countersink, and I'm going to gently put a chamfer on every one of these holes to dress it up. And then the other thing that I do when I epoxy this all together, I will use the pins, but they're going to be coated in wax so I can extract them after the epoxy cures. Because when I go to put these pins on, they have to be finished individually to length, and then they get polished and domed so they look good down in its countersunk sockets, basically. Alright, so I'm going to get these pins ready. I prepare one end first, and I do it by hand here on the belt grinder. That's a 220, pretty well used belt. It cuts pretty fine, but I'm going to show you. It's simple. I just put the pin in the pin vise, and then I start at just a gentle angle, and I roll in my fingers as I roll it up to perpendicular, and just round the end off. Just kind of do it in one fluid motion. And that's all that takes, and I walk over to my emery wheel and be right back. And in about that amount of time, you have a nicely headed pin. I'm going to turn this grinder off. Okay, so here's how I set the individual length of my pins. I always start with this hole, but what I do is I take painter's tape and wrap it around where all 3 sets of pinholes are, and I just take a center punch and I punch through this side, and I leave this side intact on the tape. Then pushing the finished side of the pin down,
I slide my finger down there till I can feel the pin push against the tape. Then I take the edge of my fingernail and I push the pin back up as far as I can with my fingernail and hold it. Then I just take a small set of dikes and using just the point, I grab that just as low as I can, really hard, and then I squeeze it real hard and put a notch in it. Alright, so that leaves a mark that I can see. Then I just put it in my pin vise. And this is where having a couple of grinders helps. So now I put it in my pin vise and I will grind it off flat to that mark, and then I will round it, buff it, and I'm done. And then that goes in this hole, marking hole number 1, and then just work my way down. So after I get the pin length set, I put them in this little holder, and there they will stay, and they are arranged this way, each to its corresponding hole, and always with the logo side up. That keeps your reference. So then when I actually go to epoxy the scales on, I have a bunch of these. These are extra long and they have been tapered on the ends and they've been polished really well. But I'll take and just put a light coat of Johnson's paste wax on these. And I'll go ahead and butter my scales up and get them set, and then I will push this through. I don't have the other scale on here right now. But these just locate the scales. I wait 2 or 3 hours until the epoxy sets, and then I just take some pliers and pop these out. They leave a clean hole, and then the scales will go ahead and cure on, and then the following day I can take these one at a time and I just roll them in a little sandpaper. I just hold them in my fingers and hold a piece of sandpaper and just give them a twist, and then give them another twist, and then they're ready to hold epoxy. I roll them in some clear epoxy, set them down through, and push them flush, and then just wait. And a couple of hours later, I'm ready to work the edges of the knife and finish construction. Okay, I have everything assembled. My temporary pins have been coated with some Johnson's paste wax, and I have mixed up some epoxy here. And I thin it just a little bit each time, not by much, but just I really knead in just a little bit of lacquer thinner. It doesn't stay thinned for very long. That lacquer thinner kind of evaporates out of it pretty quickly. So I'm just going to spread my normal layer on here. Now before I turned the camera on, I took my checkering file and I basically draw filed this with that checkering file just a little bit and cut some scores into this steel just as an added measure, and I did the same thing to the underside of each scale, so they have some nice grooves. The only thing I'm not going to do is butter epoxy into the holes. And I'm going to go ahead and start squeezing out some excess with my fingers. I'm still going to clamp this, but I want to put minimal pressure. So I'm going to start a pin down and see if I can find the locator hole. There it is. So these have a nice healthy coat of Johnson's paste wax on it. It's going to work like a release agent, like when you glass bed a rifle. So I'm going to get one more locator pin in there, and it pushes out a little blob of epoxy. I set it down, I press into the epoxy, then I push it up against the guard, and I get that just a tiny little bit of ooze, and that's fine. Now I'm going to start working my pinhole up through, or my locator pin, I mean. Alright, so we know that the scales are located now. But I also want those holes cleaned out, so this is what these things are going to be good for. Alright. I'm not going to be applying very much pressure with this clamp, but
but I want just enough to where I see epoxy squeeze back out from where I've scraped it off. The idea is you want a thin liner of epoxy to still be visible there at the edge when you're all finished. So that is that. Now we're going to take this knife out of the rotary vise and set it over there to start curing, and I'll do the last one I have ready for assembly. So that's it. We are in epoxy. The handles are on, and again, at its ugliest. But we'll come back when we go to put the permanent pins in, and we're going to use clear epoxy for that. And then it's just dressing the edges and making a sheath, putting a logo on, and getting it ready to mail. So we'll come back when we're doing some more to it. Okay, I have dressed the knife down and worked this guard into where it blends. You see the little blend lines here that I was talking about. I'm almost done with this, and it's time to put the permanent pins in. And I've taken a swab, a Q-tip, with lacquer thinner, and I've cleaned out all these holes. And so now I'm getting ready to mix up some clear epoxy and push these pins in. So I've got my logo side up, and I've got my pins arranged just as they'll go into the handle, and this moves pretty quickly. So I'm just going to take them one at a time. And I've scored the sides of these pins really well so they'll hold this epoxy. So I just start it in, take my little push stick, and I push it down flush, make sure it's even, and then just work my way through the pins. Just praying I don't drop one of these on the shop floor, because if I do, I may as well just make another one, because you don't find stuff like this when you drop it. It's just gone. It vaporizes. Alright, now just brush off the excess epoxy. I don't know where we would be without lacquer thinner. That's it. Clean this goo off my hands. My hands stay gooed up, don't they? Alright. Now I'm going to finish getting this buffed. And I can show it to you now. Those epoxy's starting to get up. It doesn't take long. I'm going to wipe some smudges off this thing. Alright, so it's final buff. This is all smudge here, but it'll be final buff. Got the guards and the handle blended really nicely. And as you see, we have that tiny little blend line that we knew we would have. But yeah, and then I put a coat of Watco Danish oil into this handle, just as a final coat, and then they just buff it with a soft cloth after it tacks up, and that should be the only treatment that you'll need to do to it, Pat. Santler's pretty tough, but yeah, it's just about ready for the logo. I'll be making the sheath here in just a little bit. I have about another 10 minutes of work to do on this just to get it up to the same level of polish as the blade, and the tang is already there. But the tang makes a nice taper. I don't know if you can see that.
And the knife balances real well. So, like I said, whatever you get yourself into, man, you're going to be up for the task. And we're going to put a nice, not a shaving razor edge on it, because those aren't strong edges in practical use. They're great for shaving your face, but that's why razors are disposable. I'll put a good edge on here that'll serve you really well, and have enough metal in back of the cutting edge to last. And we are in the home stretch. We're in the last quarter on this one.